This video is going to give you an example of an A+ informative industry presentation. So let's take a look at the rubric really quick. The very first thing we want to talk about is content. That's the first thing you're going to see on the rubric. And you'll see that as we look at the content expectations in the rubric, what we are looking for is that you follow your industry presentation outline worksheet. Not the original one, but the one that is based on all of the excellent feedback that you've gotten from your instructor and your peers. Now, we want to make sure that you're capturing the audience's attention, you're following all of these steps in that outline worksheet, and that you have a body that is well organized, that you are using signposts, you're using clear transitions, you're using clear supporting points, and that you're closing with impact. So you're following every single step on that outline worksheet, and you're following it in a very obvious way. Let me show you an example of how this can be done really well.
So these days, pretty much everyone has a smartphone. And if you have a smartphone, you probably have some games on it. Over time, you download a bunch of games, and some you keep because they're good, and some you leave because they're bad. But what actually makes these games that you keep actual good games?
So that's an example of a solid hook, a solid attention getter. What you see is that the student gave us a picture of something and then asked us a question. There are a lot of options that you can choose from. You do not have to do anything exactly like this student example. However, what I want you to notice is that it was specific, it was to the point, and it was the very first thing that he said.
Today I'm going to show you some things that you can implement into your game design to help make your game one of those good games.
So that's an example of a thesis statement. One of the things I want you to notice is he used the signpost today. Today I'm going to tell you about. So that is one of those things that cues our ear into what we are listening for. And it helps your audience understand what's going to happen next. What is the reason I'm talking today? This is it. It's one sentence and it's very concise. And everything else in the speech supports that sentence.
There are about 200,000 games on the App Store and Google Play Store, so you really want to make a good game in order for it to stand out from all the others that are out there.
So this is a clear connect with audience, and the student did two things really well. The first thing he did is he quantified. He gave us a number that helped us understand a little bit of urgency at why his topic was important. And the second thing he did is he used the word you. And this is something that you can do too. Your connect with audience should be talking directly to the audience, telling them why specifically what you are going to talk about is important to them.
I've been studying mobile game design here at Full Sail University for a year now, so I have some experience in the field.
Now the thing with speaker credibility is it doesn't have to be extensive, and your experience doesn't need to be expert level. What is important is that you give us a specific awareness of what your connection is to the topic. So what this student did is he quantified how long he has been a student, and he specified his specific interest. It was only 1 to 2 sentences. You can do this too.
There are 3 main things that you want to focus on when you're designing a game to make it good. First is playability, which relates to how the game looks and feels. The second thing is immersive elements, which help get the player more involved into your game. The third thing is emotional connections, which also help to get your player more involved into the game.
Now this was a very precise preview statement, and there are 2 things that I want you to notice with that. First, this speaker listed all 3 of his main points, and then he gave us a tiny preview of each of those main points, an extra sentence or an additional phrase that explained a preview of what was to come. This is very well done. So whenever you have a preview statement, one of the things that you want to make sure happens is that that preview statement is reflected in your main points. Now if you look at the outline that you're supposed to have, one of the other things that we want to notice is that with your main points, you're going to have some source citations. So the next clip, I want you to listen to how those main point titles are stated. And I also want you to listen for the source citation that comes immediately after it.
So what is playability? Researchers at Nokia put together a playability model which defined the components of good playability. The 3 components are gameplay, usability, and mobility. The second thing you want to focus on is immersion. Ernest Adams, a game designer and author at a website called Gamasutra, highlights 3 types of immersion that you can implement into your game to get players involved.
Now, what you just heard were this student's introductions for main point 1 and for main point 2. So you'll see, if you listen back to the preview statement, those two main points were listed first and second, and then he follows it up within the body of the speech, introducing main point 1 and main point 2, similar to how he introduced them in the preview. Something I want you to pay attention to. This student says, what is playability, for his first main point. Notice how that's phrased as a question. That is not what I am looking for. Please, when you are titling your main points, title them as statements. This happens very well in the second main point. In the second main point, I also want you to pay attention to the source citation. Notice that he cites Ernest Adams. And then he doesn't just leave it with the guy's name, he actually tells us who Ernest Adams is, and then he tells us where the article was found. So you've got Ernest Adams and Gama Sutra. This is very well done. That is the two touch points you need for your source citations. The student also made sure that he had all of these sources listed in his references section on FSO.
So to wrap things up, you really want to focus on your game's playability, immersive elements, and emotional responses. If you implement these three things, it'll make your game more compelling, interactive, and fun for the player. And who knows, you could even end up creating the next Angry Birds or something.
Now this was the student's conclusion for this speech. The first thing I want you to notice is that he uses a signpost to let us know that the conclusion is coming up. He says to wrap things up. That's a good idea. Next, he relists his main points and his thesis, and he lists them very succinctly. I'm listening for that when I'm listening to your speech. And finally, he gives us a very good clincher. He says, you may even end up, and he gives us something that we might be able to do if we implement the information he's just given us. That's well done. Now we're going to talk about delivery, because you'll notice that the rubric is divided into content delivery, verbal source citations, and that QuickTime feedback response. Delivery is 1/4 of your grade here. Now what we're looking for in delivery is for you to execute Garr-Reynolds' natural delivery style. And what that really means is that you are giving us a corporate version of yourself. We want you to look professional, we want you to look like you are comfortable, we want you to look confident, and we want it to feel like you're actually talking to us and that you enjoy talking to us, like you're having a good time. The first step towards that corporate appearance is making sure that you have a professional space as opposed to a personal space. So a personal space would be a bedroom or a bathroom, something like that. A professional space would be something that feels like an office or something that feels like a neutral. So you'll notice that the students in these examples are using neutral spaces. They have blank walls behind them. But you could also choose to have a space that felt like an office. So if you had a bookshelf behind you, that could be okay. The caveat with bookshelf is you want to make sure that if there is something behind you, furniture, picture frames, whatever, you want to make sure that they are clean, they are neat, and it looks like you've got things organized. The next thing you want to think about is eye contact. Watch the student example of giving eye contact in a speech. Notice that she is using index cards to keep her notes, and she also is looking at the camera about 95% of the time.
To quote the article, Photoshop is not a bad word, by Matt Klazowski, technology has changed everything. The world knows Photoshop exists. The standards by which photography was judged, even just 10 years ago, doesn't hold up against today's standards. We expect more from a photo.
A final takeaway with that eye contact example is notice that what she was doing is she was giving a quote. Did you notice that she actually knew some of that quote and she only had to glance down at her notes periodically? That is what you will need to do in your industry professional speech. A third thing to focus on with your presentation is you want to make sure you are utilizing Garr-Reynolds' naked presenting style. And what that means is we are going for a style that is conversational, a style that looks like you are comfortable, and a style that gives you some confidence. In this next clip of a student video, notice how this student uses hand gesture, notice how she uses facial expression, and notice how she looks like she is seeing the person on the other side of the camera.
When I first opened Photoshop, I was terrified. It seemed like a foreign language I could never master. But within 1 hour, I was doing basic photo correction and working on a digital painting. I learned not to let fear limit me. We all have access to amazing tools at Full Sail, such as lynda.com, and great instructors that are always happy to help us. This brings me.
So those are some tips on how to make an A+ informative industry presentation. If you have any questions, contact your instructor directly. We are looking forward to seeing you give your best work in this assignment.